Raymond, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman, honourable members, invited guests and others. This is truly a blessed opportunity, and Suidlanders organisation is, let the record reflect, grateful for it. Thank you, and a special thank you to Mr. Tomasz Poreba and Mr. Peter Birčić for their special efforts, their personal efforts to arrange this event. The thanks of Suidlanders also goes to our hosts, the European Conservatives and Reformists Group, for their faithfulness and courage in going against the spirit of this age and in standing for the immutable foundational European values, in being willing to deal with this most sensitive of subjects in the New World Order, namely the new South African Rainbow Nation, as it is known. The biggest challenge of this speech lies in getting you to believe anything at all that I have to say, because almost everything that I have to say to you today is the diametric opposite of what our government, the globalist media, the South African public, the liberal elite, and academia will tell you. Indeed, our new President Cyril Ramaphosa has recently said that Suidlanders is spreading lies, that we are motivated by racism, and that, for example, he stated this explicitly in New York to Bloomberg Media, there are no attacks on white farmers. In fact, he said it twice. A subject with which you are no doubt familiar, and one which we, Suidlanders organisation, use to illustrate our general claim that there is a severe crisis in the Rainbow Nation, even though we are by no means a farmers' advocacy group. On that note, perhaps I should explain who and or what is Suidlanders. Suidlanders' sole mandate, our only raison d'être, is as a civil defence organisation to execute a national emergency plan to safeguard the welfare of civilians in circumstances of civil war. We are constituted under the aegis of the Geneva Conventions in terms of the specific provisions of Protocol 60 to 69 of Article 60 to 69 of Protocol 1 of the protocols additional to the Geneva Conventions. We are preparing and planning legally and lawfully, decently and respectably for a severe crisis in South Africa. That is how severe we believe that the crisis is. If it sounds surprising to you, perhaps once you have considered the following verifiable facts, truths of what is happening in South Africa, you may appreciate why it is that Suidlanders is the largest organisation of its type in the world, and why it is that hundreds of thousands of quiet, law-abiding families, not crazy prepper groups or preppers, or rabid right-wingers, are taking our black leaders' threats of civil war seriously. Oh yes, ladies and gentlemen, it is black leaders of the new South Africa who are promising war and who are encouraging their members to prepare to prosecute a war against whites. The BBC did not tell you that, did they? CNN, Sky News, Canal 5, the list goes on and on. Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, they won't talk about it. Let's see if perhaps I can share with you some facts. The first theme I shall briefly address in the limited time available is that of the drastic decline and decay of South Africa under the governance of the South African Communist Party, the African National Congress, and the Congress of South African Trade Unions, what is known as the Tripartite Alliance, but which is only ever advertised to you as the African National Congress. South Africa once produced a superabundance of electricity at absurdly low prices. We were the world leader in that regard not a long time ago. Recently, our most prominent electrical scientist, a man whose predictions have hitherto been the most reliable in our country, said that South Africans may expect rolling blackouts for up to 16 hours a day for the next 5 years. They began 4 days ago. On the 10th of February this year, it was reported that the final death toll from moving a group of mental patients from government care to the private care of relatives of the government was 144. Can you imagine this? The government state psychiatric hospitals farm out the patients to, and I speak literally, ladies and gentlemen, to mortuaries, to kindergartens. And that in one group, 144 defenseless psychiatric patients should die. Many of you will be aware that last year, in one village, not town, village, in the province from which I come, over 300 people admitted to actively participating in an ongoing basis in cannibalism. In June 2018, the IMF said that it is worried about South Africa's finances. The bailouts of state-owned enterprises, that's what we call them, such as the national airline, the post office, the national electricity supplier, the railways, etc., stands at 53% of the gross domestic product of our country, not 53% of our budget. 53% of the gross domestic product of our country is devoted solely to bailing out failed institutions. On that note, and perhaps to provide you some sense of perspective on these failing institutions, on the 25th of November, the Auditor General revealed that 296 billion was lost by the government over the past 5 years. The total of lost money for the most recent year, that is to say up to March 2018, was 79 billion. Do you believe this? This is happening in the new South African rainbow nation, ladies and gentlemen. You and I both know that the word lost is merely a euphemism for stolen. Nobody loses money. It's not possible to lose money. It's either in the account or it's not in the account. And that is why 53% of our GDP has to be spent on rescuing state-owned enterprises. It was also reported that there are 12,000 dead people on the National Treasury's database or registry of companies which may conduct business with the state. 12,000. The mini province that encompasses the city of Johannesburg, it's a sort of a miniature province, not dissimilar to the District of Columbia in the USA. Bigger, but there's a similar idea. The province of Gauteng generates 13% of the GDP of the whole of the continent of Africa. Comes from more or less Johannesburg. 13% of the GDP of the whole of the continent of Africa. But as of now, all 44 of the 44 water sewerage pumping stations on the Vaal River that feeds Johannesburg and the province of Gauteng, are not working. All 44 of the only 44 water and sewerage pumping stations today are not working. And 2 of the 3 sewage treatment plants are not working, and 150 million litres of raw, untreated sewage are flowing into the Vaal River daily. According to the US Census Bureau, the expected lifespan at birth in South Africa has fallen by 4.3 years since the end of apartheid. It was recently revealed by Dr. Mark Tomlinson to immense opprobrium, to the utter disgust of our government that anybody would be so treacherous as to say this, to make this ostensibly false claim. But it was confirmed in a report by Médecins Sans Frontières on Saturday, that 19% of all of the world's HIV/AIDS cases are in South Africa. On Thursday, the 18th of October, Reuters reported that the number of riots in South Africa is greater than ever. Many of you are of an age where you will have seen the reportage of what was occurring in South Africa in the late 80s, particularly between the Zulu and Xhosa people who were effectively proxies for the apartheid government and for the African National Congress-led revolutionary forces. So you will know what it means when Reuters says that the number of riots in South Africa is worse than ever. It was recently revealed that over 14,000 government employees have illegally been doing business with their employer, the state. At the South African Airways alone, 13 employees currently now have interests in contracts worth 646 million. As reported in the Mail and Guardian newspaper of 23rd November, the Department of Home Affairs, various branches, are in many cases more closed than open. So if you want to get a passport or an identity document or a driver's license, so on and so forth, don't bother going in most cases. One, which is currently running, by the way, one of these offices is running, in theory it's open, has been closed for 2 years. In another case, one opened 1 day in the past year. According to a group of organizations led chiefly by one known as People Opposed to Women Abuse, POWER. It is a group of organizations, but the standard bearer for that group is this POWER that I mentioned to you. 35% of all women in South Africa will be raped in their lifetime. Now, they went to pains to point out that that's not an average. In other words, if a woman gets raped 18 times, she doesn't cover, statistically speaking, for 17 other women. No, it's not an average. It doesn't account for multiple rapes. 35 out of 100 women in South Africa will be raped at least once in their lifetime. The second theme that time permits me to employ to justify why an organization, Suidlanders, should exist in the Rainbow Nation is the explicit rhetoric that is being deliberately used in the run-up to what we would tell you is our forthcoming civil war. The African National Congress never fully disbanded Umkhonto weSizwe, the spear of the nation, whose logo you saw up there not so long ago in Professor's speech, the armed wing of the African National Congress. And last year, the head of Umkhonto weSizwe in the kingdom of the Zulu people, KwaZulu-Natal province, said, "It is now time for young blacks to join training camps in the bush to learn to fight whites in a civil war that is coming." The former, or rather the Chief Justice, our Chief Justice, Mogoeng, said in an interview in March of this year that South Africa is facing a civil war. On Thursday, the 3rd of November last year, our Minister of Defense said in a televised broadcast, live on television, that if white people protest the rates of attacks on farms, the murders of the farm murders, they will bring a genocide upon themselves. If whites object to this, the Minister of Defense promises a genocide. I should perhaps take advantage of this opportunity to tell you that everything that I've quoted here today is from liberal and mainstream sources. Every single one. The brother of our former president, Thabo Mbeki, his name is Moeletsi Mbeki, he's a very highly regarded commentator. I regard him highly too. I think he's the best political observer in South Africa, has recently said that we are heading towards a civil war. Andile Mqitama of the Black First, Land First organization has in the past few weeks repeatedly spoken about civil war. On, I believe, I could be mistaken, but I believe the 10th or the 9th of October this year, he held an interview with a journalist from Harper's Magazine of America who came to South Africa to write a 6,000-word special for Harper's Magazine. Any of you who know anything about journalism, who know anything about Harper's Magazine, will understand the gravity of what I've just said. To write a 6,000-word piece in a magazine of that stature, arguably the most serious highbrow magazine in all of the United States. He was sponsored, in fact, by the Pulitzer Center. That's how gravely they see this matter. He was told by the same Andile Mqitama that he will settle for nothing less than a Leninist revolution in which the colonialists are wiped out. Julius Malema, the head of the Economic Freedom Fighters Marxist Party, has said on various times that he's not calling for the slaughter of all whites yet. The Prince Regent of South Africa's oldest tribe told me after that, Simon, in European idiom, you can say something and not mean it. He said, we don't have such idiom in black language. It just doesn't exist. He said, what we heard is that he will, at some point, call upon us to wipe out the whites in South Africa. And he said, by implication, we have to prepare for it. The same Julius Malema said quite recently, perhaps 3 months ago, that he is setting out to cut the throat of whiteness. And a few days ago, I think Monday, he said that it is now time for blacks to prepare for war. War is inevitable. The chief advisor to our most recent Minister of Finance, we go through them quite quickly, but the most recent Minister of Finance, his chief advisor, tried to put on the agenda of a closed conference called Blacks in Dialogue, the topic, taking up arms against whites. This is the advisor, or the advisor to the former Minister of Finance. And so it is, ladies and gentlemen, that I sit before you here today, pleading with you to recognize that people such as ourselves, just because we are white, and just because we do not correspond to the zeitgeist, to the liberal principles of the new South African Rainbow Nation, don't come here out of spite. We don't come here motivated by racial hatred. We come here because the damn electricity is not working, and because we are being warned that we may expect to be slaughtered. And the mere fact that your media, your politicians, your academics refuse to speak about it should tell you something. Because if a mere fraction of what I've described to you today, all from liberal and mainstream sources, was occurring in Scotland, Vietnam, Peru, Liechtenstein, or Bengal, it would be on the front pages of every newspaper in the world every day for months on end, and you know it. We know that the world is not going to come running to our aid. We don't expect to achieve that here today. But we do believe that there are still left in the world today people who form a hard core of the traditional values of Europe, the values that we share, the values of civilization, decency, and respectability. And all we ask of that hard core is that you spare us a thought in the times that lie ahead of us, because we will need every spare thought that we can get. Dark times lie ahead of my people and my country, ladies and gentlemen. Take my word for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Simon, for your touching presentation. Thank you very much for figures, for facts, for everything what you delivered. I would like to assure you from my side that during the upcoming days I will table the official request of written question to the European Commission concerning these issues. Hopefully I will get the answer which will be, we will try to correctly follow the real facts which are happening in South Africa. But on the other hand, I would like to tell you that the awareness of what's going on in your country within European politicians, leaders, it's very poor, or maybe not poor, is intended to be poor. So there is a long fight, there is a long way to do the best in order to recognize these facts, these events, and to improve the situation in your country. But you are among people who always try to raise such challenges in the open, frank, honest way in order to help your nation, because it's not only our internal determination, but also this is the interest of whole European Union and whole Europe, because as I said at the beginning, if there will be civil war in South Africa, if there will be fight, if there will be war, the European Union will be affected without any doubts in the bad way. So let me open the discussion. Questions, if you have any questions, please, we are ready to answer it. Please.
Thank you, Simon. Here. Yeah, I have two questions. I will be quick. The first one, this summer in Spain, we had one newspaper that is called El Confidencial that was talking a lot about the case in South Africa. Mostly, they were taking the view of the white farmers, and they were doing interviews to many white farmers about the situation, the current situation. And I remember in those articles they were saying about the riots that people enter in the lands of the white farmers, and also they steal some animals, but also they were talking about death. So my question is why you didn't mention any of the deaths that were happening. And the second question is what counts for the international investors? So if South Africa is not able to secure the private property for their own citizens, how comes that we foreign investors we will invest in that country?
Thank you. Those are two very good questions. I didn't mention the farmer tax and the matter of expropriation of land without compensation also, for the simple reason that these subjects we are endeavoring to debate them. You can watch YouTube interviews and so on, and perhaps get this knowledge. But in the limited time available, I thought that it would be good to present lots of other facts, so that it's not just a matter of the white farmers and the poor black guys and the land and those are valid points. We can speak about them all day. I can tell you facts about the murder of white farmers that will turn your hair. For example, there is some dispute over the numbers, but let me tell you that the Commissioner of Police, General Kehla, it means grandfather, Sithole, revealed on Friday the 4th of May that the number of the murder rate of white farmers over the past 3 years is 57 per year. There are approximately 25,000 white farmers in South Africa. Murder, or intentional homicide as it is known, is measured per 100,000. Do the maths. 25,000 goes into 100,000 4 times. 4 times 57, 228 is, according to the government, the murder rate of white farmers over the past 3 years. The murder rate in Europe is about 1 per 100,000. The murder rate in the USA, which is supposed to be gun crazy and all of that, is 4.88. The national murder rate in South Africa now, the government has more or less lost control of crime. The national murder rate of all people in South Africa now is about 35.7. The murder rate of white farmers, if you take the government statistics at face value, you can't compare it. It's unbelievable. But by now, people should know this. I'm taking up a lot of time, which is unfair, so I won't go on about land expropriation without compensation. But those are 2 themes that I excluded here so that people can get a broader perspective. Not just about those 2 themes, but about everything that's happening in the country. Anyway, your second question was where international investors will stand in this. It is very difficult for me to say, but our organization would point to the fact that our government has never ever kept any of its solemn promises on these difficult subjects. They were, for example, the whole debate about the expropriation without compensation, what have you, originates from the fact that the government wrote into our constitution that it would never do this very thing that it is doing now. We would say to you that if it suited the government to expropriate the property of international investors, it would do so. Once it had used up everything else that it could, if that was all that was left, it would do so, with a long list of excuses, of course. They would paint themselves as the victim from beginning to end. I don't know, but our most prominent economist is a man by the name of Dawie Rhodes, who has hitherto, over the past 24 years of democracy, the African National Congress assumed power on the 27th of April 1994. Over the intervening 24 and a half years, Dawie Rhodes has always been a flag bearer for the new South African rainbow nation. We should try harder, we should love each other more, harmony, integration, blah, 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 blah. He recently released a series of videos in which he said explicitly, take your money out of the country, get your money out of the country while you still can. He's a very serious man. And he's done a 180-degree turn. So I think that is the advice which I, as a non-economist, as an ignoramus, as an ordinary citizen, would take from an expert if I was a foreigner contemplating an investment in South Africa. I don't know any better.
I also would like to add some words to this question.
Yes, thank you very much. I think we have to add some other information about the investor problem in South Africa. We have to remember that after the black government came to the power, Mr. Mandela accepted transfer of billions of dollars from South Africa to the other regions. Everyone who drinks the Lech or the Zuber beer should know that they were sold, the breweries were sold by Mr. Kulczyk, the South Africa Miller Breweries, the second brewery in the world. And also the largest family, the richest family in South Africa, Anglo-American, which belongs to the Oppenheimer, get the acceptance of transferring their funds, which they generated from the huge mines, outside of South Africa. They bought the gold mines in Ghana, in South America. Now they care very little about the situation in the mine sector or in other sector in South Africa, because they own their own companies, huge companies in other parts of the world. So on one hand, we discuss about the potential investment from outside of the world to the South Africa, but very little have been saying about the money leaving the South Africa, and huge money. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, comments?
Ja mam pytanie do pana Simona, bo to, co się...
That's a very, very good question. I was recently chatting to a farmer, and he said, we were speaking about a certain area that we both know, with which we're both familiar. His cousin farms in a beautiful little valley, and there are 6 farms there. 5 are owned by blacks, and 1 is owned by this farmer's cousin, a white man. And he was telling my friend how happy he is that these farms have been given to blacks, because they're not being farmed. And so the water rights for the little stream that flows through the valley are all going to him. He's stealing everybody else's water, because the 5 black farms are not being farmed at all. Which brings me to a point. The reality is that many of the farms and the land that has been transferred in recent years is lying fallow and is not being used, which goes to your question of the ownership. I have here, there was a parliamentary debate recently in which it was revealed that over 90% of the farms that have gone to black people, the title deeds have not been given to the black people. Similarly, there are about 45,000 commercial farming units in South Africa. I'm coming to a point. There are about 45,000 commercial farming units in South Africa, of which about 33 or 32,000 are owned by whites. And this land is supposed to resolve the great land crisis in South Africa. How do you give 45,000 farms on land that is dry, to 1,000 people each? How? You ask a good question. And my response to you is to say that it is clear that there are a number of factors in this debate that don't make any sense at all, as your question points out. Your question illustrates a much larger topic. A whole lot of this stuff doesn't make sense, but it sounds good. And it is, we would say, very much a communist ploy, and that you are correct. But people in our country just don't see it. It is consistent with, to use the American expression, the communist playbook, the communist manual. This is how you go about it. Doesn't have to make sense, as long as people believe it.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Any comments, questions, points would like to raise? Yes, please.
Ja mam pytanie do pana Simona. czy białe rodziny zamieszkujące RPA mają jakąś realną możliwość obrony przed agresorami? Chodzi mi tutaj o tworzenie jakichś grup obrony, albo przekazywanie pieniędzy, albo same szkolenia z zakresu obsługi broni. Bo czasem w krajach, które są mniej wyedukowane, bardziej przejawia ten argument siły niż mediacja. Dziękuję.
Again, a very, very good question. The murder rate of farmers has decreased slightly. It's still phenomenally high, as I've pointed out to you. But in that decrease, some people have said, well, you see, it's better. You know, let's say there is a trend towards 160 or 145 per 100,000 murder of farmers. People say, it's wonderful, you see, you're living in paradise. What they lose sight of is what I pointed out to you earlier. 4.88 murder rate in the USA, whatever. My point is that when it comes down, it's because somebody did something. The rate of attack, this is what nobody mentions, has gone up. It is because the farmers are protecting themselves that you know, they're trying to. If you go to a farm in South Africa now, you can experience maybe a tall fence, 15 feet tall fence, with a razor wire, with electric fencing as well. The farmers all have weapons, vicious dogs. We have in recent decades mastered a breed called the Boer Bull dog, which is about the size of a mastiff but has the temperament of a pit bull terrier. Some farmers, I'm telling you a true fact, and there are some videos, I have one on my phone. Some farmers are now using wild lions in their gardens to deter attacks. That gives a sense of perspective. I think now I'll answer your question very directly. You can get weapons in South Africa. We used to have a very big gun culture. But the African National Congress, the tripartite alliance with the South African Communist Party, is now trying to clamp down to make it more and more difficult. In fact, they are now proposing that that weapons for self-defense, firearms for self-defense, be banned. But none of the murders are being committed by people with legal firearms. The African National Congress brought in, under Operation Vula, in the late 80s and early 90s, millions and millions and millions and millions of weapons from the communist bloc. More than 2 million of those weapons are unrecovered. And it's well known that those are the weapons being used in the murders. But this is a classic tactic, isn't it? Blame the victim. If I take your gun away, we'll all be safer. But I'm going to keep my 7 guns, which are illegal. I mean, it's crazy. It doesn't make any sense. I'm not even sure that the answer makes sense in my own ears. It's all nonsense.
Please.
We have to add also that in South Africa, farmers live not in the villages like in Europe, but they are spread all over the country, very thinly, because, as I mentioned, the quality of the land is very poor, so they have to own a large area just to keep the living. So this is the problem, that even if something happened on one farm, it's very difficult to bring the support from the other farm. This is a specificity of South Africa. Thank you.
Yes.
So, any questions? If not, thank you very much again for coming. Thank you very much, our distinguished guests, Simon, the professor, Peter, for being with us today, for giving us this significant information, important information, which must be followed by, I hope, ECR group in this House in order to better recognize this situation and widespread this knowledge within our colleagues in the European Parliament, but also in the context of our relations with and contacts with European Commission. We should be much more active also in the future. This is my first, the most important conclusion after this meeting, that there are things which should be absolutely better recognized, and the knowledge should be delivered directly to the people who decide about foreign policy of the European Union, and we will do the best in order to do it during the upcoming months. Thank you very much for all participants. Thank you very much for everybody who helped us to organize this meeting. I hope that all information you get today will be helpful in terms of better understanding South Africa political situation and also Africa as a whole. I'm definitely sure that the big challenge, the big interest of the European Union is to help South Africa in order to avoid civil war, which would be terrible, which would have terrible consequences for the rest of the world, for Europe especially, in terms of immigration crisis. So thank you very much again. Wish you a good rest of the day and see you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.